Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome back to a topical deviation from our regular scheduled broadcasting. The reason for which is the restarting of the development of Vampire The Masquerade Bloodlines 2, the sequel to the best RPG ever created and set, of course, in the world of darkness. Now, those of you who've known me for a while know that I consider Bloodlines to be, again, one of the best games ever made, and so the idea of a sequel tickled my pickle quite frantically. But after years of certifiable incompetence and general issue idiocy, the original developers on the sequel were tossed unceremoniously off the project back in February of 2021. Ever since, there's been nothing, and most presumed the game, despite Paradox's insistence to the contrary, was well and truly dead. But a new trailer emerged very recently revealing that the game is still in active development, and rather than playing a fledgling vampire, this time you'll be playing as an elder. And despite myself, my blue-eyed naivete can't help but hope it's still going to be good. And so I'm going to take this excuse to explain what exactly an elder is in the context of Vampire the Masquerade. So, what is an elder then? Well, with a title like that, most immediately and obviously, it's got to have something to do with age, right? And yes, it does, though there is no hard and fast rule at what age a vampire becomes an elder, as age is not the only qualifier. An elder is also expected to be an influential and active part of vampire society, which in turn is usually as a result of their age. As the older a vampire grows, the more powerful he becomes as well. The active member part too is important, as there are many truly old vampires out there, but most of them have entered into the state known as torpor, a hibernation of sorts that can last hundreds or even thousands of years, depending upon the age of the vampire. And as they are asleep, well, obviously, they are not active members of vampire society, and so they are not currently controlling their own domains, which also tends to be a defining mark of an elder, the possession of a domain or territory, or alternatively some equivalent influential position in kindred society and politics overall. Now, theoretically, a young vampire could be in possession of his own dominion. He could potentially be influential in kindred society, but it is unlikely, as again, the older a vampire is, the more powerful he is. And the older, the more likely he is to belong to an earlier generation as well. The earlier the generation, the more thickly the blood of Cain runs in his veins. And the power differential between generations is even larger than that of age. And since vampires are near universally paranoid, distrustful, and scheming creatures, anyone who wishes to maintain a domain is going to have to be able to do so via force and power and intrigue. Thus, in turn, most elders are going to need to be quite old. In the European context, an elder would probably have to be at least 200, 300, 400, or 500 years old to be able to maintain a domain. Now, there is a difference here to be made between Old World and New World. The vampires in America, where Bloodborne 2 is of course set, tend to be significantly younger than those in Europe, meaning that an American elder could be as young as 100, 150 to 200 years old. This is because the power structures in the New World are, well, significantly newer than those in Europe. In the Old Country, vampire clans, dominions, and power structures could be hundreds, if not thousands of years old. By comparison, those in America are only a few centuries, meaning that it is far easier to carve out a personal slice, as the competition is less fierce and less established. This goes doubly so, of course, on the east coast of America, where the Second Anarch Revolt kicked off in the 1940s, killing most of the elders and sending the rest fleeing with their tails between their legs. Now, our elder, as seen in the teaser trailer, appears to be in a state of torpor. Now, as mentioned, this can be entered into voluntarily by older vampires, and it is entirely possible that this is what our elder did. He might not have experienced the Second Anarch Revolt in America. He may be completely unaware of it, and he may not even be from Seattle, where he is now being brought back. Alternatively, torpor is also a state a vampire can enter into after severe trauma or being drained of all blood, whereupon they will only awaken after having been fed. It could be that our elder was an established man on the East Coast who was defeated by the revolutionaries but not diablerized, then recovered by his faithful servants, mayhaps? We'll have to wait and see. And then brought back to life again in Seattle. And if he was indeed defeated, well, that's not an uncommon fate for the elder. You see, here's the thing. The elders themselves, as all vampires, tend to be jealous and power-hungry creatures, especially as the elders have managed to claw their way to the relative top of vampire society. On their journey to that lofty summit, they will almost certainly have abandoned most, if not all, of their humanity. This too, in fact, can be a definition of an elder vampire, one that has already thrown away the shackles of morality. Many may even have begun to take on a bestial visage to mirror their internal darkness. As the older a vampire grows, the more interesting their appearance tends to become. They also tend to become rather tyrannical and oppressive of younger generations. The elder vampires are, of course, convinced that they know best. And hey, maybe they do. They've managed to survive centuries within the dark and twisted world of the kindred after all. It must undoubtedly rankle to see the younger, upstart generations think they know best, commit all of the same errors that the elders themselves may have committed, and worse still, in their arrogance, they might think that they should be the leaders instead. And it wouldn't be the first time. This misguided notion was, after all, what gave birth to the spark and eventually the raging inferno of the first Anarch Revolt in the 1400s. This uprising was, of course, eventually quashed with the creation of the Camarilla and the Convention of Thorns, which re-established the hierarchy once more. Though the fires of revolution had not been completely smothered, and would indeed rise on several other occasions, most immediately relevant on the 21st of December 1944 in the Second Anarch Revolt. This saw the death of the Prince of Los Angeles, Don Sebastian, the highest-ranking Camarilla leader on the East Coast, and with him the destruction of most of the elders as well. This second Anarch revolt was, in ways, arguably more successful than the first one, as it created the Anarch Free State. But it, like all anarchies, swiftly began to collapse, of course, and in less than a century, it was all but gone. Still, the lessons of that revolt no doubt sit heavy in the minds of the Elder in the period in which Bloodborne 2 will be played out, with modern Elders being likely to be even more paranoid and brutal against the lower generations than before, to make sure that they don't get any bad ideas in their tiny little youngling brains. This suppression of the fresher-faced vampires can take several forms, depending upon the Elder in question and the size of their domain, as of course the scale and scope of an Elder vampire's domain can vary drastically, everything from a few city blocks to vast areas of open countryside. The ways in which they police these areas can also vary. Often it will simply be through sheer physical force. A kindred elder that's 300, 400, 500 years old, and perhaps belongs to one of the older generations, 6th or 7th, for example, is quite common in leadership positions, is going to be vastly stronger than any fledgling. Of course, numbers can make up for a disparity in immediate strength, sure, and it is often common for younger vampires to gather together, at least on a temporary basis, to survive the often harsh nights of the world of darkness. But you're going to need quite a few younger vampires to take on an old 6th or 7th generation. Plus, of course, the Elder is not going to be without allies of his own. Managing a territory is usually not a one-man job. And even if it could theoretically be done by one kindred individual, they're likely to have at least a small support network built up around them, if nothing else, for simple security. Again, Elders usually distrust other vampires, knowing very well that competing Elders might have designs on their territories, their knowledge, or even, in the case of diablerie, their very blood and flesh. This, in turn, means that they're going to put in place some rather draconian measures, which they are fully aware of is going to earn them yet further enemies. It is a rare Elder indeed that can sleep soundly. And even when they do enter into torpor, for example, they will do so in very well-prepared positions, either through secrecy or sheer defenses, often a combination of both. Some of the antediluvians, for example, went to sleep under actual, literal castles, held by whole clans of faithful lesser vampires. And even that turned out to be far from sufficient in quite a few examples. These loyal vampires, in turn, will be controlled either straight up through the bond between a sire and his various offspring, or via political machinations, knowing that their position in kindred society depends on their master, or knowing that they are ambitious themselves, promising them power, influence, or ancient knowledge, so long as they don't kill the wellspring of that knowledge, of course. Secrets as well might provide bountiful protection to a ambitious and erudite vampire lord, as there are quite a few tricks in their books as well when it comes to controlling the lower classes. Everything from being able to dominate their minds to confusing them. The chosen way in which they oppress the lower classes, by and large, depends on the clan and the personality of the individual vampire. Now, in sheer martial prowess, an old 6th or 7th generation vampire would be a match even for a werewolf. And werewolves in this particular universe, in case you are unaware, are absolute unmitigated wrecking balls. To the point that a new vampire isn't going to stand a snowball's chance in hell against one for any extent of time. Unless, of course, there's a handy pair of automated doors nearby. I always thought that was mildly idiotic, but considering the timing required to pull it off, I suppose we can call it fair in Bloodlines 1. But a 6th or 7th generation vampire of decent age, well, they'll give a werewolf a run for its money. Even more so if they're able to actually prepare for the encounter, as the Garu themselves have their own set of weaknesses too. But even though they are potentially mighty combatants, the Elders also simply just exist within the overall wider vampire hierarchy. They are not all powerful, not even within their own domains, as they of course answer to the Camarilla. And one of their main jobs is maintaining the Camarilla's grasp over, again, wider kindred society, including, most obviously, the enforcement of the masquerade. Now, it is every vampire's duty to make sure that the masquerade is maintained, for the simple reason that if the mask begins to slip now, well, humans have been breeding rather rapidly, and the vampires are none too keen on their chances in an open confrontation anymore. Not that that theoretical possibility is the primary concern of an Elder, mind you. They're more worried about what the Camarilla will do to them, as any breach of the masquerade is punished swiftly and extraordinarily strictly. And if whomever responsible for the breach cannot be located and brought to justice swiftly, well, shit rolls downhill. And you can bet your ass the prince is not going to take responsibility. So the Elder had better pony up a scapegoat mighty quick, or he's going to find himself with a pair of horns. It is of course also possible for an Elder to be the prince, the ruler of a large area, and, well, he's going to be a very old vampire, so by definition I suppose he would be one, but still, scapegoats need to be found. There are even instances, incidentally, of conclaves, groups of elder kindred maintaining larger areas together. These are usually given the title of senators rather than princes, however. And the way in which the princes and senators go about their business is, well, as varied as the Elders themselves. Every vampire is, in essence, free to do what they wish with their own territory. Within the wider context of the world, of course, there may be obligations, there may be promises, and there is absolutely the masquerade to maintain, obviously. Some go so far as to take interest in the most minute parts of their domain, micromanaging everything down to the last silly little vampire within their power. Others might be far more hands-off, simply setting policy decisions or de facto laws, or handing down instructions to intermediaries. There are even those who are little more than convenient puppets for the larger powers that be. Much like the Elders as well, there isn't necessarily much in the way of a succession system here, neither for the princes or the Elders. As mentioned, an Elder is, by and large, usually simply the oldest active member of the kindred in the area. In turn, that usually means that he is the most powerful, and so if he disappears, goes to sleep, or gets killed, whomever comes up next is usually the one capable of seizing the position and the power. There are exceptions to this as well, like in particularly pivotal areas, for example, where the almighty Camarilla might have a direct interest in making sure that whomever takes over control knows where the land lies. But by and large, it's a free-for-all. Now, fortunately, power vacuums are fairly rare amongst a species, quote-unquote, that lives for centuries and millennia, though they tend to be all the more violent for when one actually erupts, of course, but they too tend to be settled relatively quickly. In vampire terms, anyways, as there's usually no shortage of ambitious vampires on the up and up, ready and able to take their shot at the throne. And with that, you now know a lot more about what a vampire elder is. Until next time, I have been Arch. Thank you all very much for listening, and I do hope to see you all again soon. Have a good day.